Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this Lunch and Learn, which is on the really important and interesting topics of encryption and post-quantum cryptography, which I think we need demystified for all of us. So today I've been joined by John Martin from HCL Tech. Kia ora, John, and thanks for taking the time to come and explain these to our audience.
Thank you very much for asking me to do so. It's really appreciated.
So to kick us off, can you give us a bit of a short overview of who you are and what you do for HCL Tech, who you work for?
Okay, so the first thing that I'll say that most people get hung up on the fact of what is HCL. Well, it's actually Hindustani Computers Limited Tech. Okay, it's an Indian company. It's rather like IBM and HP from years ago. It started from a garage, believe it or not, in India. Okay, my role basically is as a senior advisory technical architect, and mainly involved obviously in design and solutions, but also primarily with cybersecurity engagements as well.
Great, thanks. Good and brief and makes a lot of sense. But as you and I were just comparing notes, you used to work for IBM for many years. And I also, a long time ago in my dim dark past, worked for IBM, and I believe you were an architecture leader for IBM for a long time.
Yes, I actually, before I left IBM due to an acquisition to HCL Tech, I was actually the Australia New Zealand architectural practice leader, helping people to become architects and go through the certification processes.
Right, which is fantastic. And it means that you're going to be able to help explain these kind of concepts without getting too technical, but I do know that you also can explain them really technically. So for the audience today, we're not going to get too technical. We're just going to talk about the why and the what and the how. So let's start with encryption. So John, what is encryption and why do we need it in our lives every day?
The best way that I can think about it from a fairly high level perspective, it's basically invisible locks, okay, which actually protects the way we interact with the digital world on a daily basis. So every time we use FPOS, online shopping, shopping online, government services like RealMe or IRD interactions, important ones, okay, business communication, cloud storage, example, or even critical infrastructure. Think about water, power grids, telecommunications, what we use every day. All of this, the reality is that everything in New Zealand actually depends on these mathematical locks that keep us safe for decades.
Right. That's a lovely way of describing it. So we're here today to talk because the encryption landscape is going to have to change. So first of all, let's talk about what the world is like now. So how does the current encryption protect our online banking and messages and shopping and all of the things you've just described?
Well, invisibly, majority of people, okay, you would actually jump on a browser and interact with a bank or online through a mobile phone, etc. And there is what we call public key infrastructure based around algorithms, which were based of decades of work before, and they have been put in place protecting us basically from our online transactions to actually storing data long term for your health records and so on. From that perspective, we haven't really had to think about it until recently, whereby and I'll just jump in at this point, okay, is that about 2 years ago, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in USA basically brought everybody's world basic attention to the world that the fact is that we need to change from our current way we encrypt and decrypt things, and this is where the term post-quantum cryptography came out of.
Right, so it came from them. So
that's right.
I invited you along to this because we had an ITP member meet up a couple of weeks ago with a really enthusiastic discussion about post-quantum cryptography.
Yes.
And so I thought maybe it would be helpful if you can also talk a little bit about what makes quantum computers different to regular computers.
Really, to bring it down again, okay, think of a traditional computer based on binary ones and zeros. It's basically another way to think of it is you reading and processing data or information bit by bit, basically reading a book page by page. Okay, what quantum computers can do is actually read the entire book simultaneously in one, rather than reading it one page at a time, you can read the whole book. That's the capability of a quantum computer once it becomes fully realized.
So this is going off script a little bit. We didn't prepare for this, but I just wanted to ask you, are there quantum computers out there now?
Yes, the reality is it's not science fiction anymore. Okay,
Right.
it's been boiling away from an engineering perspective. It came from quantum mechanics about 50 odd years ago. Okay, and now the reality is now we have Google and IBM and many other organizations actually now working actively on quantum computers today, and actually getting results. And this is why we're pushing the post-quantum cryptography move and migration.
Right. So changing our encryption from the current implementation to a new implementation that will protect us from bad actors who have access to a quantum computer really is what we're setting the scene for here.
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
Great. Now it's probably a good time for me to mention to the audience we have a Q&A, and I'm going to get a little bit more
Mm,
detailed and technical in the questions for John now that we've done that kind of
sure.
positioning stuff. But if anyone does want to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A function and I'll pose those to John as we go. So next, I understand quantum computers will be powerful enough to break all of our current security. That's what I've been reading and that's what I heard from that member meetup. What's the time frame? When's that going to happen?
Okay. So fundamentally, that what's expected is that by the year 2035, which seems a long time,
Does
okay, that the capability is that quantum computers will have the capability to actually what we call crack or decrypt existing public key infrastructure on our current encryption algorithms that we actually use to protect our online services, how we protect data across everything we actually use, and that includes all critical infrastructure as well. So there is a mandate which is actually created by the USA, by Europe, they've taken on board as well, and Australia last year in December 2024, is that all critical infrastructure must migrate by 2030 to
wow,
post-quantum cryptography algorithms, which are actually out in the public.
right. Don't get me started on the whole thing about critical infrastructure and cybersecurity protections and the lack of recognition and we have here in New Zealand, and the fact that other jurisdictions have mandates like this and can have mandates. But it is really good to know that there are other governments who are keeping a really strong watch on this, which is good. I'm going to pop to the Q&A because William's asked a
Mm,
question that kind of aligns with the when question of
yes.
what do you think the main engineering challenges in creating a working quantum computer might be? Do you
Mm.
know much about the people who are investing in this technology and what they're trying to tackle?
Fundamentally, having come from IBM, okay, from last September, millions or billions of dollars of research have been put together because we're no longer talking about ones and zeros. We're now using what we call qubits. Okay, so effectively, a quantum computer will deal with light or photons. Okay, not actual ones and zeros anymore. So you can actually have a situation whereby you can have four or five or maybe a number of different states. Okay, but if you try to observe a state, it actually changes. There's a number of quantum
Right.
mechanics and philosophy behind this. And one of the ones you can look up from 1935 is Schrodinger's cat, okay, which was a big thought leader at that time, where basically you could have a situation where you may have, I'm sorry about bringing a dead cat, but they could also simultaneously have a live cat at the same time, which cannot happen in classical computers.
Right. Okay. Getting my head around that. And and a question from me, which is a bit off script as well, is do we think, or is there kind of collective thought out there? I know the big tech companies are investing in this, but do we think the bad actors, the ones who are behind many of the big cybersecurity attacks, do we think that they're investing in this kind of technology as well?
I would say absolutely. Um, um, okay, going back a bit further, my original background was the UK government. Okay,
Right.
and fundamentally there are state actors, as we call them. Okay, I won't name them, but you can guess who they are. But
Mhm.
there is a giant competition going on in the background to see who can actually break the current encryption that we have used in public key infrastructure. To give an example, it is fully expected that what we call RSA encryption right now, which is up to what we call 2048 bits used to protect our online protection on a daily basis, will by 2030 be no longer relevant, and it can actually, its strength can be actually reduced by half, or even be cracked by 2030. That's a sort of picture that's being built at the moment, and
Wow.
there's a fast competition going on, some millions or billions of dollars to actually create this
Yeah.
situation. Okay, so that's why there's a drive to do this.
Wow, that's crazy. So coming back to what we've been talking about, you've talked about these computers being powerful enough to break our current security protocols and our current encryption. How do you see that this is going to affect ordinary people from a privacy and security perspective?
I've thought about that. Okay. From a person, I've broken it down into personal levels. Okay.
Mm.
Um, so basically, thinking about your assets being at risk. Okay. From a personal level, you've got to think about your banking and financial records. Okay. You've got to think about your health information, which is held. Okay, your personal communications, which you'd be using apps through Meta and TikTok and various things. And what about your digital identity as well? Which is the driver behind open banking and the driver for digital identity and trust from that perspective. When you look at it from a business perspective, think of it from customers' databases, their responsibility to
Hmm.
protect the data, uh, the intellectual property of an organization. Okay, think of universities, financial transactions because they're trying to companies want to make money. And what about supply chain communications as well? From a national perspective, okay, think about government communications. How do we protect the nation from state actors, etc.? Our defense systems. Think about critical infrastructure, water, electricity, telecommunications. We expect it to be on all, every day, okay? And then think about economic data as well.
Right. So the answer to all of this is post-quantum cryptography. So do you want to just explain a little bit more about what this is and why it's going to keep us safe
Right.
once these quantum computers are here?
The best analogy I can think of, okay, it's a new type of
Right.
mathematical lock, okay, which basically even quantum computers themselves cannot break. That's the fundamental thing, okay, from that perspective. So it's based on different mathematical problems, okay. For the really technical, we're going into what we call lattice encryption, okay. It is designed to resist quantum attacks. It's backward compatible with our current systems, okay, and it's actually been standardized by international bodies. That's the main driver. So it's rather like a simple analogy. our current encryption is a combination lock, okay? Going to post-quantum cryptography is like switching to a completely different type of security system that quantum computers don't know how to attack.
Right. So thinking about the Windows 11 fiasco that's out there right now,
Mm.
where there's a whole lot of devices that aren't capable of upgrading to Windows 11, does this mean in this period of time where we're all having to kick off projects to protect ourselves,
Mm.
we'll be discarding a whole lot of hardware? Will hardware exist? Will a business who's holding a data set that needs to move into a state where they're protected in this post-quantum cryptography world, will they be able
Yes.
to use the same hardware for that, or are they going to have to buy all new hardware? Or am I asking you things that haven't been answered yet?
No, no, that's fine. Put it in context. Internationally, the financial sector, the banks have been working at this for a number of years. Okay, telecommunications should be. There's a lot of international focus on it because we depend on communications,
Mm.
um, and they're already supposedly working towards the migration. Yes, from a financial sector perspective, they will need to change some hardware, okay, in order to protect the keys to the kingdom, if you like, from that perspective. So basically, key management as we know it today, what we call public key infrastructure, um, will be broken. Okay, we will need to change to quantum key management systems from that
Right.
perspective. So therefore, need new hardware and new algorithms in order to be able to do that.
Right. Nathan made a really good point about hardware as well. He's concerned about a recent vulnerability discovered in the Apple AirPlay
Mm,
protocol, which has meant a number of Apple devices have had to be basically confined to e-waste. And then we've also got the Windows 11 thing. So one of the things that companies are going to have to be really conscious of is the e-waste aspect if they are having to migrate their hardware, isn't it?
absolutely. And the good thing is basically people can actually do a lot to actually prepare for this right now.
Right.
Browsers, okay, Google, Chrome, for instance, are already preparing in the background to protect people's online transactions. Okay, some applications on mobiles are already working towards this already, so there'll be a seamless migration behind the back. You almost won't even sense it. Okay, what we're saying to commercial organizations is a quick analogy. Basically, there was something called the poodle attack. Okay, which was basically based an algorithm called SSL version 3. It took 6 years for the payment industry to actually migrate to what we call transport layer security
Right.
version 1, even though the attack was actually alive. Okay, and this is why we're saying let's get some awareness of these
Do it
things.
now.
Do it
Yeah.
now. There is a version of transport layer security versions 1.3, which behind the scenes is ready to take post-quantum algorithms. So what we're saying to organizations, make sure your cryptography is up to date. Okay, at least reach version 1.3 of TLS. That will give you some airspace. Okay, from that perspective. Plus the fact is, there is some good news that there is some post-quantum cryptography algorithms existing today which are
Right.
quantum resistant. Okay.
Wow. So
Uh,
people have already started developing them.
yes, that's right. So one of them, very simply, is what we call the Advanced Encryption Standard, to what we call 256-bit in length. Okay, that if you've migrated your data, okay, to that standard, then it is known that it's actually quantum resistant. That means if your health records have been transported, okay,
Mm.
to that standard, we haven't got anything to worry about from that perspective. But imagine that the fact is, you've got to think about authentication systems. You've got to think
Yeah.
about data, which is in Internet of Things, embedded systems, smart buildings, they're all okay. These you've got to talk to the vendors because the vendors can either upgrade them or
Right.
you're going to have to replace them from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
perspective.
Like my smart meter in my home with
Yes.
3G being discontinued. There's lots of that kind of thing going to have to be considered. So I'm hoping there's a really easy explainer for this, but what's involved in switching from our current encryption methodologies and algorithms and protocols that we've got in place to the post-quantum cryptography methods once they have been developed?
Well, in fact, they're actually alive now. Okay, the actual
Right.
algorithms have actually been released since, off the top of my head, July, August 2024. They were actually put out in the public. Okay, and basically, what we're saying is everybody should be in a what we call a discovery mode. They should be creating an inventory of what encryption algorithms are actually using in their day-to-day applications and discovering where they are, okay, to be able to step forward to actually then test their current
Right.
systems, okay, whether they're compatible or whether they're going to have performance issues. Okay, so basically, fundamentally, critical infrastructure has got about less than 5 years. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
the rest of us maybe a bit more. Okay, but fundamentally, what we're saying is don't give it to the compliance people, okay, and just let them get on with it. People need to educate the organizations, raise their education level, become aware of what it is. Okay, we
Hmm.
have time to actually deal with it if organizations embrace it, educate, okay, and rather than sitting on the fence, actually learn about it and actually go out there and start creating what we call a cryptographic bill of materials, rather like a software bill of materials, and start discovering where is it? Okay, do I need to start interacting with vendors and talking to them and saying, what's your
Yeah,
roadmap? How are you going to help
yeah.
us to actually migrate? Because a lot of us from a day-to-day perspective is going to be straightforward. We won't even know it's happened. Okay, but businesses will know. We then depend on banks, we depend on telecommunications, we depend on critical infrastructure. They're the important ones that we need to ensure that they're fully migrated and
Mm,
protecting our digital world.
mm. Now, Williams asked a question on the message board about is there a risk of bugs and malware being introduced in that
Mm.
migration process?
Unfortunately, yes. Okay. What we're seeing is a steep exponential climb with the factors artificial intelligence, okay, and Gen AI models, and now exasperating the situation and being able to find vulnerabilities very quick, a lot quicker. Okay, there is an analogy we have in the security world. We call it hack now, decrypt later. Okay, basically it means if people can find your data, grab it, they may not be able to see it today, but once the first quantum computer is made available, they will be able to crack that encryption. Okay, so that's hence the term hack now, decrypt later.
Mm,
Okay,
right.
so what we envisage is basically there's potential there for ransomware, for instance. You can imagine people stealing data, okay, and holding people to ransom. I know it happens now, but there could be a rise if people aren't migrating to the new algorithms in suitable time.
So Ellen and Aaron have both pretty much asked the same question
Yeah,
here, which is how are we able to prove that a quantum computer cannot decrypt lattice-based cryptography? And Aaron goes on to say, especially when we haven't have working quantum computers to test with.
right. Okay. So there has been some mathematical geniuses in the background. One of them is called Shor's algorithm. Okay,
Hmm.
and there's a number of others, Grover's algorithm, and there's another one called Simon's algorithm, which each one of those has actually proven mathematically that the strength and the capabilities of our current crypto standards, okay? And they foresee this, hence the date between 2030 to 2035, okay, that the fact is that once the first quantum computer is available, okay, then potential risk goes up exponentially in terms of being able to crack the current encryption standards we're actually using today.
Well, I was going to ask you the question of how confident are you? Um, but it sounds like there's a level of confidence already there, and it'll be the migration test that will bring the real confidence.
Yes, it's being prepared, okay. Think of the fact is, I don't want to go into too much um, in terms of what you need to actually do. From an end user perspective, it'll just be largely transparent. Okay. You might have slightly larger file sizes because there's a
Right,
change in algorithms. It might be a slower initial connection, but you will have enhanced security confidence as well. Okay. From a IT department's perspective, you've got to think of digital certificates and keys having to be changed, okay? Updating their software and their hardware, their modified security policies, and enhanced monitoring requirements. When you think about for business and thinking about vendors, you've got to think about vendor management. Okay, will they upgrade? Do I replace it or not? What about compliance documentation and updates? Staff training, okay, making people aware, okay, and then risk assessment from an auditor's perspective. Have those controls being put in. There's already the payments industry, the PCI DSS version 4.0.x, okay, has already mandated inside their controls that we should actually move towards post-quantum cryptography
right.
already. And now auditors from that perspective are now requesting you to put the strongest encryption algorithms in place. And given the fact that post-quantum cryptography is already here, it's just going to be tested, okay, and proven.
So does that mean it's going to cost companies a lot of money?
The rough estimate of the top of my research, okay, and a lot of companies won't like it given the current situation,
Yeah.
but potentially it might potentially statistically about 15% of their security budget currently that would have to think about in terms of
Mm.
going through that process, depending on the size of the organization. Obviously, if you're a larger organization, it could take longer. It could take 2 to 3 years to actually be
Right.
prepared and migrate. Smaller organization might be a lot more agile, but having being made aware and moving towards that will help them protect their organizations and therefore the business.
Right, good to know. Right, I'm going to ask you, we've whipped through the 30 minutes
Yeah,
really quickly. I'm going to ask you one more from the message board and then one more
sure.
question from me. Alan also went on to say, does resistant mean that it can't be broken?
Yeah. Resistant basically means that from our current knowledge today, okay, that for instance, the advanced encryption standard AES 256-bit, from what we know today, okay, with the first quantum computers being made available, they will using lattice encryption, they will be resistant to that type of attack.
Right.
There may be new attacks I can't predict, but given the fact if you push quantum computers and artificial intelligence together, you can imagine the world's going to change quite a lot. So
Right.
we've got to be aware that these developments will happen.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
Thank you. That was great. Now, if people who are listening to this want to find out more, have you got any advice on resources they should go look at or where they could get started on their journey of learning more about this topic?
There's a lot of resources. Having come from IBM, okay, um, there is such a thing called Skills Build, okay,
Hmm.
which actually teach. There's some basic courses which are free. Okay, you just need to get hold of an IBM ID. It's okay, and create a password, etc. Login. And you can actually do courses towards understanding what quantum computers are, what quantum cryptography means, we normally use the term quantum safe, okay,
Okay.
which basically means that they're quantum resistant. But look for courses like that. There are some other online courses. You'll find ISC2, you'll find ISACA, the audit organization are all really up there trying to teach
Right.
professionals to prepare for the thing. But there's a lot of literature out there. I look at LinkedIn on a regular basis, looking at the international picture. It's changing almost on a regular basis. There are some rumors. There's been three Chinese so-called research to say we've cracked certain algorithms.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
but the actual academic and cryptographers have actually analyzed, and each one of those have been found to be false. There's going to be an increase of those kind of false stories coming up.
And I guess there'll be standards bodies like IEEE and ISO and IEC will all be producing standards in this space as the technology emerges. So that'll be another place that people can get more information.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, obviously critical infrastructure, the standards, you say the
yeah,
ISOs and the IECs.
yeah,
You'll already find ISO 27001 will be bringing that up. And I said PCI DSS are already bringing that in.
right.
So
Yeah,
it's already happening behind the scenes. People just got to look
yeah,
and realize there is a change coming, but don't sit on the fence.
yeah. And we can't, this is my last night to learn, so I'll
Mm,
say this political thing. We can't wait for our government to mandate because they probably never will. So we need to look for what the global industry standards are
mm,
telling us we should do.
absolutely.
Hey, thank you, John, so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for watching. This was really fascinating. I wish I was staying and could do a part 2, 3, and
Mm.
4 actually, because we could get a lot more technical. But hopefully, my replacement will be able to pick this up with you, and we'll be able to put more kind of technical details out there. But really appreciate you giving up your time and expertise to explain these really important concepts today.
No problem. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Take
Ka
care.
kite.